The weekend getaway was great. 2 days away from the routine, no need to think about work, just relaxing in a rented cabin by the lake. The drive back was smooth, and everything seemed normal until we turned the corner of our street. The first strange detail was that the porch light was off. We always leave it on when we travel, but I thought maybe it had burned out. But when we parked and got out of the car, I noticed something worse. The front door was slightly open. My stomach dropped immediately. My first thought was that someone had broken into the house. My husband looked at me, clearly feeling the same, and whispered, "Stay in the car." But I didn't stay. We approached slowly. He pushed the door and called out, "Is anyone here?" Complete silence. I expected to see the house turned upside down, but everything was in place. The TV was off, the shoes on the mat, even the blanket I had left thrown on the couch before we left. We entered carefully, looking at every corner, trying to understand what had happened. No broken windows, nothing stolen, nothing out of place except one thing. In the kitchen on the counter was a glass of water. It was a small detail, but it made my blood run cold. We hadn't left that glass there. I would have remembered. My husband would have remembered. And the worst part, the water seemed fresh, as if someone had just filled it. My mind tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe we had forgotten the glass there before we traveled. Maybe it was a silly memory lapse. But the more I thought about it, the less it made sense. I always washed the dishes before leaving, and the sink was empty. And even if we had forgotten, why did the water still seem fresh? My husband picked up the glass and felt the side. It was cold. He looked at me, and I knew he was just as uneasy as I was. Still, we tried to act rationally. "Maybe someone came in but didn't take anything," he said, but even he didn't seem to believe it. We decided to check the rest of the house. We slowly went upstairs, listening to every little sound around us. My heart was pounding so hard that I could barely breathe. We checked the bedroom, the bathroom, the office, nothing. No sign of a break-in. But still, the feeling was suffocating. It was like someone was there, watching us. My husband even checked inside the closets and under the bed while I stared at the hallway, feeling my skin crawl every second. After a while, we tried to convince ourselves that, whatever it was gone. But that feeling of relief lasted only a moment. We went back downstairs to the living room, still not understanding what had happened. My husband locked the door firmly, as if that would be enough to ward off the unease surrounding us. I turned on all the lights in the house, even though I knew it wouldn't make a difference. That heavy silence remained, stuck in every corner. We sat on the couch, trying to gather our thoughts. "We need to check the cameras," he said, and I nodded. We had a security system with continuous recording, so anything strange would have been captured. My heart raced as we grabbed the laptop to access the footage. I wanted an answer, but at the same time, I was afraid of finding it. We accessed the files from the previous night and started fast-forwarding. Everything seemed normal at first. The empty garden, the dark house, time passing slowly. But then around 2 in the morning, something happened. A silhouette appeared on the screen. A man. He didn't break the door. He didn't force any entry. He simply entered, as if he had the key. My stomach turned. He stood at the entrance for a while, motionless. Then, he calmly walked into the living room and sat on the couch. He didn't do anything. He didn't steal anything, didn't touch anything. He just sat there, hours and hours, without moving, without sleeping, without even seeming restless. Just existing in our space. The footage continued in suffocating silence. We fast-forwarded through the video, expecting to see him leave, hoping that, at some point, he would just walk out. But that never happened. The clock in the footage kept ticking, and the man remained sitting there, frozen in the same position. Until around 5:30 in the morning, something strange happened. Without any noticeable movement, without getting up or moving, he simply vanished from the frame. 1 second he was there, the next, the chair was empty. There wasn't a single frame showing him standing up, walking to the door, going upstairs. Nothing. He just disappeared. We rewound, paused, tried to go through it frame by frame, but it didn't make sense. The house was empty when we arrived. There were no signs of forced entry, no footprints, no evidence that anyone had been there. But the glass of water was, and the man from the footage was too. The question that settled between us, without anyone needing to verbalize it, was terrifying. Where was he now? I shivered all over when I realized that we didn't have an answer to that. Panic began to spread in my chest like fire. My husband slammed the laptop shut and stood up, looking around, as if expecting to see that man emerge from some dark corner of the house. I didn't want to admit it aloud, but I felt the same. The feeling of being watched, that suffocating unease, it all made sense now. We didn't know who he was, how he entered, or how he left. But the worst part was something else. What if he had never left? What if he was still here, hiding somewhere we couldn't see? We couldn't stay still any longer. We grabbed anything that could serve as a weapon. A baseball bat that was leaning against the door, a kitchen knife, and began searching the house again, this time with more urgency. We opened every cabinet, looked behind every piece of furniture, explored the attic, even the tiny space behind the washing machine. Nothing. But I didn't feel any better. Quite the opposite. I didn't know what was worse, finding something or continuing to not understand what was happening. After nearly an hour of searching every corner of the house, we went back to the living room, exhausted and frustrated. There was no one there. No physical evidence except that glass of water in the kitchen. But that didn't mean everything was fine. I looked at the glass again and felt a chill run down my spine. It was such an insignificant detail, but at the same time, it was proof that something impossible had happened. My husband rubbed his face, trying to think. What if we call the police? I suggested, but the idea seemed ridiculous as soon as I said it. What would we tell them? Hello, a man appeared in our house and disappeared without explanation, but he didn't take anything and left no traces. They'd laugh at us. In the end, the only thing we could do was try to move on. We locked everything up again, reinforced the locks, and decided we would sleep with the lights on that night. I wanted to believe that it had been a mistake, a glitch in the cameras, a simple misunderstanding. But the truth is, when we lay down, I stared at the ceiling, unable to close my eyes. And deep down, I knew my husband was awake too, feeling the same as I was. That man entered our house, spent hours there, and disappeared. But what if he was still nearby? I didn't sleep that night. Even with all the lights on, with the doors locked, and the windows checked 3 times, I just couldn't close my eyes. My husband didn't sleep either. I could hear his heavy breathing next to me, the way he shifted in bed, restless. Neither of us wanted to say it out loud, but it was clear, we were terrified. It wasn't just the fact that a stranger had entered our house. It was the way he stayed there, as if he had all the time in the world. And the worst part, how he disappeared. It didn't make sense. Nothing did. In the early morning, when I realized it was pointless to try to sleep, I got up and went to the living room. The laptop was still on the coffee table, the screen dark. My stomach turned as I remembered the footage we had seen hours before. I sat on the couch and opened the video again. Maybe I had let fear blind me before. Maybe there was an obvious explanation that we had missed. I took a deep breath and hit play. There he was again. The man, standing at the entrance, his shoulders relaxed, as if he were at home. Time passed, and he remained there, motionless. The clock marked 2:15 a.m. when he turned and slowly walked over to the couch, sitting in the same position I was in now. A shiver ran down my spine. I advanced the video, trying to find any detail, any clue. But it was always the same. He stayed there, staring ahead, expressionless, without any reaction to the environment. The only thing that changed was the seconds and minutes in the corner of the screen, passing non-stop, until it got to the moment when he vanished. I hit pause and rewound a few seconds. Advanced again. Stopped. Tried frame by frame. There was no transition, nothing. 1 second he was there. The next he wasn't. My heart raced when something crossed my mind. What if he never left? What if he was still here, but the camera couldn't capture him? Suddenly, I felt a presence behind me. My heart almost jumped out of my chest, but when I turned, it was just my husband. He looked as exhausted as I felt. "Are you still watching this?" he asked, sitting next to me. "I can't stop," I confessed. He rubbed his face, tired, and then looked at the screen. "Try looking at the outside cameras," he suggested. It was a better idea than just staring at that damn video again. I went to the folder with the recordings and selected the backyard camera. The garden was dark, lit only by the streetlight. I hit play and advanced the time. That's when something even worse happened. Around 4 a.m., the external camera detected movement in the yard. The motion sensor triggered the night vision and revealed him. The man was out there, standing in the middle of the lawn, facing the house. The most terrifying part? This was the moment when, according to the living room camera, he was still sitting on our couch. My body went cold. "This doesn't make sense," my husband whispered. I advanced the video. The man in the yard didn't move, just stared fixedly at the house. And then, without warning, he disappeared in the same way. I didn't know what was worse, seeing him inside our house or outside, watching us. "Go to the garage," my husband said suddenly. My hands were shaking as I selected the camera. The screen flickered, and then the image of the empty garage appeared. My husband grabbed his phone and checked the front door, making sure it was still locked. He was trying to cling to anything that would make us feel safe, but there was nothing. The truth was obvious. That man could come and go whenever he wanted. I needed to get out of there. I needed to breathe. I got up from the couch and went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, trying to calm my nerves. But as soon as I reached for a glass in the cabinet, my blood ran cold. I had cleaned the counter before going to bed. I was sure of it. But now, right in the same spot as before, there was a new glass of water. The glass gleamed under the kitchen light. The water looked fresh. I dropped the glass I was holding and took a step back, trembling. "Oh my God," I whispered. My husband appeared at the kitchen door and found me standing there, pale. He followed my gaze and saw the glass on the counter. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "It can't be." But it was. We hadn't put that glass there. And yet, it was there. My husband grabbed his phone and began calling the police. But I already knew. I knew that when they arrived, they wouldn't find anything. No signs of a break-in. No intruder. Nothing. Just that glass of water, as a silent reminder that, no matter how much we tried to convince ourselves otherwise, that man, or whatever it was still here. I felt my chest tighten, my stomach churn. We had never been alone. From the moment we entered that house, from the moment we found that door open, he had been there. And the worst part, maybe he had always been. With each passing minute, fear seemed to grow, becoming a solid presence around me. I felt as though I was being watched constantly, as if someone were waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. And as time went on, the more I felt that the house was no longer mine. It was being overtaken by something we couldn't see, but it was definitely there. When my husband returned from the living room window, his face was even paler, and his eyes seemed empty. He didn't need to say anything. I already knew what he had seen. Or rather, what he hadn't seen. The backyard was empty. There was no sign of anyone, no movement. The man had simply vanished. I tried to breathe deeply, convincing myself that perhaps it was just a collective nightmare, an illusion created by our anxious, terrified minds. But there was something that didn't fit. Something wasn't right. And I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being hunted, that we were just waiting for the moment he would reveal himself again. Then, a sound we hadn't heard before cut through the silence of the house. A crack, coming from upstairs. My heart raced. It was a subtle noise, but enough to send panic through me. It was as if something or someone was moving in the attic. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. My husband looked at me, his face twisted in fear. He didn't need to say anything. He had heard it too. We both stood in silence, trying to make out any other sounds. The crack came again. It was clearer now. Something or someone was up there. "I'll go see what it is," my husband said, his voice low and tense. "No, don't go up there. It could be him, or who knows what," I cried, grabbing his arm. He looked at me, his eyes filled with determination I didn't recognize, as if he was trying to take control of the situation, but also in shock. "I need to make sure no one is here," he replied, with forced calm. He turned to grab the attic key, and then began climbing the stairs, ignoring my protests. I stayed at the base of the stairs, feeling the tension rise with every second. The sound of the floorboards creaking above me made me wonder if he was feeling the same rising sense of dread. Fear was palpable now, a shadow hanging over us, waiting for the right moment to strike. Suddenly, a scream pierced the air. "Come here! Quickly!" My body froze. My husband was up there, but his voice was full of desperation. I ran up the stairs without thinking, taking 2 steps at a time. I reached the top, and then saw it. The attic was empty. The stacked boxes were untouched, and the weak light from the hanging bulb cast strange shadows on the walls. But that wasn't what made me stop. What made me stop was the look of horror on my husband's face. He was staring at the floor, fixedly, as if he had seen something he shouldn't have. I followed his gaze, and when I saw it, my stomach turned. There was something on the floor. Something small, but it looked like it had been placed there on purpose. A piece of paper, crumpled, with a message written in red ink. My husband swallowed hard. I didn't put this here." I crouched down to pick up the paper, and as I unfolded it, a chill ran down my spine. The message was simple, but it carried a silent threat. "I'm closer than you think." I dropped the paper with trembling hands. What was happening? Who was watching us? The fear I felt now wasn't just psychological. It was physical, real. Someone was there with us, and we couldn't escape. I turned to look at my husband, hoping for some explanation, but he was as white as a ghost, his eyes locked on the emptiness ahead of us. He didn't need to say anything. We were trapped. And this man, or whatever he was, knew it. It was no longer a house. It was a trap. The moment the man's reflection in the mirror began moving toward us, everything seemed to shift. The basement, the air, even the sound around us, it all became distorted, like we had stepped into a different reality. The fear that had once been a gnawing worry in the pit of my stomach now felt like a living thing, crawling up my throat, choking me. My husband's hand trembled in mine. I could feel the cold sweat on his palm, his fingers twitching as if he too was struggling to comprehend what was happening. The man's reflection stepped closer, and then, just as quickly, he vanished. A blink of an eye, and he was gone. We stood in the dark, frozen, barely able to breathe. I don't understand, I whispered, my voice trembling. My words felt empty, as if I was speaking into a void, as though the house had swallowed the sound. Where did he go? My husband didn't answer. He was staring at the mirror, his expression hollow, eyes wide with terror. I wanted to run. I wanted to grab him and flee, never looking back. But something held me there, something far worse than any fear I'd ever felt before. A low hum filled the room, like an electrical current vibrating in the air. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, sharper, almost like static. Then the mirrors started to shimmer, the glass warping, twisting in ways that didn't make sense. Suddenly, the basement light flickered again, but this time, it didn't turn off. It stuttered, as if trying to force itself to stay on. And when it finally did stay lit, I saw him. Not in the reflection this time. Not in the glass. He was standing right in front of us. His eyes locked on mine, hollow, empty, like there was nothing behind them. Just an endless void. We both took a step back, but it didn't matter. He was already there. The air grew colder, and I could see my breath in front of me, clouding in the chill. My husband grabbed my arm, pulling me back toward the stairs, but the man's gaze never left us. Run, my husband whispered, his voice hoarse. We didn't have to be told twice. We turned and bolted up the stairs, the sound of our footsteps echoing through the house. We didn't look back, but I could feel him following us. The air was thicker now, heavy with his presence, suffocating. I wanted to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. I wanted to leave, to escape, but I knew deep down that we couldn't outrun him. We reached the front door, but as my husband fumbled with the lock, I realized something. The door wasn't going to open. It wasn't just locked. It was sealed. I pushed against it, my heart pounding in my chest, but the door didn't budge. We were trapped. And that's when I heard it. A whisper, soft but unmistakable, coming from somewhere behind me. Not leaving. Not anymore. I turned to look at my husband, panic flooding my veins. His face was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief, his mouth moving but no sound coming out. Then I felt it. A cold, clammy hand gripping my shoulder, pulling me backward. I tried to scream, but the air was thick, suffocating. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. Before I could process what was happening, the world around me shifted, and I found myself standing in front of the mirror again. The man was there. Not behind me this time, but standing beside me. His reflection grinned, and the whisper came again. We're together now. And as the reflection of his smile grew wider, I realized the truth. We had never been alone in this house. The man, the presence, had always been here. It had always been watching us. But we were the ones who had let it in. And now we were part of it,